Hey, everybody, it's Megan Torrance, and welcome to week 10, I think it's 10, of xAPI cohort. So that's super exciting. Izzy Lara is here joining me, whom I've known for years now through the cohort. So this is a network. This is a community. So I want to get us started here. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to be rocking and rolling. We are opening up week 10. Want you to go ahead, introduce yourself in the chat, your pronouns if you would like, and how we should refer to you, where you're dialing in from, and whether it's cold, because it's become fall here in Michigan, and we've had 2 mornings that I've woken up and it's still been in the 20s. So like we were chatting before session, all of a sudden it's November. We are today going to spend some time working through our curriculum arc, and we'll talk about our curriculum arc for cohort. If you want to talk this up or follow the conversation on social, you can do so at using the hashtag xAPI cohort and tag xAPI Gnome. Izzy Lara's Twitter account is there, as well as Watershed LRS, and there is a Watershed Theater. So choose what, and Watershed's in a lot of things, so choose carefully if you do that. We are recording this session as always, so that for the people who can't make it live, they can catch it on the rebound, or if there was something really interesting that you wanted to recap for your team at work, you have the opportunity to do that with that web session recording. We send that out to everybody who is signed up for the cohort, so it drops right in your mailbox. You don't even have to go looking for it. It's also available in the cohort Slack. So we are all here gathered today and have great news that we have hit the 600 mark for signups for cohort. We accept, as you may know, new registrants to cohort all semester long, and we've actually got some folks who are already signing up for the spring 2021 cohort. Keep in mind, we don't automatically roll you forward. We don't assume on your behalf that you want to be moved forward. So we ask you to sign up each cohort. That means that over 600 people have actively taken the step to sign up for the fall cohort. So thank you, all of you. And that if you want to be in the know for the spring cohort, you go back out to the same exact place and sign up at www.xapicohort.com. As always, it's free and open to the community, and our opportunity to build a community around adopters and experienced people and implementers and experimenters. So the rich community vibe is powerful. I was talking with Izzy and Jamie behind the stage before we got started, just about the power of this community and the network building that gets done here, and really the career development that gets done here. So take a moment. If you're watching this live or on the recording, pat yourself on the back for taking time to focus on your own career development. So we're all here now. Today we're going to talk about xAPI and your data governance with Izzy Lara. And Izzy, I'm going to put you on the spot before you start talking to be thinking about, how long have you been part of cohort? Do you know that offhand?
I have actually thought about this already. I think it's been about 2 years now.
Very cool.
Has it been longer? It felt like much longer though.
Izzy, 2 years just really barely covers the pandemic.
I know, right? But I think that's actually about accurate.
All right.
I think that's
right. All right. I'll take your word for it. Cohort's been around since the fall of 2015. So we've been doing this. Like, this is not our first rodeo, and we've built a huge community. And the all-time registration for cohort is almost 4,000 people. So that's pretty. There's 4,000 unique people, right? Over that 5-6 years, which is pretty powerful stuff. At the same time, the xAPI itself has evolved and matured, and we now are at a point where, and we've been for a few years, but we're now at a point where we've been for a few years where the people who are keepers of xAPI have been thinking about this. But the people who are implementers of xAPI need to be thinking about data governance. So I'm really pleased, both for Cohort as well as for xAPI itself, that we're talking about data governance. Today, not actually talking about data governance, but talking about Cohort, I have Jamie Washington with me. I am double booked today with Camp Gamicon. So I am going to be leaving early and leave you in Jamie's solid hands for the end of our session today. So I can go over there and talk about something completely different. But if you're here, you are not too late to Cohort if this is the first time you've ever connected up with us. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what Cohort is, what we're all about here, because we want to make sure that everyone understands that this is a welcoming, open community. And the way that we welcome you is by making sure that some of the unsaid things, or things that could be left unsaid in a community that has that kind of maturity that we do right now, sometimes that's daunting to newcomers. So let's talk about what the Cohort is. Cohort, it is free, virtual, vendor neutral, and yet also vendor supported. So while you will not find yourselves hit up for sales, and there are no sales pitches in the Slack community or in our sessions, the vendors who are doing the work and doing the research to create xAPI have participated in offering free extended trials, in offering their insights and their knowledge, and offering their support to project teams as they work along and might hit roadblocks. So that's been something that when xAPI first got started really was a powerful thing for me as someone who really thrives on collaboration. It's just a really exciting time to see organizations that would otherwise be competitors of each other sitting around beers and conference tables, not at the same time, talking about how are we going to do this together in a way that makes sense for everybody. And that's been really powerful. Cohort is a 12-week learning by doing, project-based, both learning experience and community. And so the formal part of that learning experience happens in these weekly web sessions. Welcome here. And in project teams. So you can join or start a project team. We offer a Slack community and a GitHub repository for Cohort to be able to work in a free and open and collaborative opportunity to actually try out and make something. And because you have the collaborators in the Slack channel, you can be tapping into a group with wider skills than you may bring yourself. I always love it when instructional designers say, hey, I need a developer to help me with something, and they get help. And I love it when developers said, hey, we need like an actual course to be able to test, and they get actual courses. And this is how it all comes together. I love it. Holding it all together, we have weekly email updates and with the web session recordings, with the PDFs of the presentation decks, as well as other information that's useful as we go. The arc of the education for the semester, right? There's a logic to this. So if you're just joining us and you want to refresh and kind of figure out where to jump in, all these recordings are available. We start with what is xAPI and what is the cohort? We then talk about sending data. We then talk about receiving data. And then we start talking about some of the implications of having data and being able to navigate some of the affordances and opportunities and challenges of this advanced data experience, right? And this advanced data ecosystem. And that's solidly where Izzy comes in with xAPI and data governance. Next week, we've got case studies, real world case studies from Art Workentine and Duncan Welder. And I got a chance to preview some of their latest stuff at DevLearn a couple weeks ago. So that was pretty cool. And then we'll wrap up on November 18th with demos from the project team so you can see what's been worked on throughout this semester. Izzy, I am going to turn it over to you for a bunch of minutes, about 40 minutes, to talk about xAPI and your data governance. So welcome. And we've got a good crowd going on now and an opportunity to have discussion as we go. So I'm going to stop talking.
All right. Let me just get my window situated here. All right. Let's see if I can do this right.
Awesome. Well, Izzy does that. So you may have heard us mention. So Izzy joined the cohort. That's where I met Izzy. Izzy's now a data engineer at Watershed, which is one of the LRS providers, and had a recent session at DevLearn on this topic. So we're getting our own kind of, if you didn't make it to DevLearn or you didn't make it to Izzy's session because you were booked opposite like him with him, like I was, you can get it here today. So thanks, Izzy. Take it away.
Yeah, no, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Megan. Yeah, it's been wonderful to be part of the cohort for, I guess it's been 3 years now. How time flies. Anyway, yes, so my name is Izzy Lara, and today I'll be here to talk about 5 steps to good xAPI governance. So for those of you who are not really familiar with Watershed, Watershed is actually part of a larger parent group called Learning Technologies Group, or LTG, and we have a number of sister companies that are part of that umbrella as well. In particular, for those of you familiar with SCORM Cloud, for example, Rusty Software, which is on this list, they are the ones that actually manage SCORM Cloud LRS. And I am very familiar with it because I actually started using it as part of the Torrance Learning Cohort. So yes, and we also have a number of other companies that are there. Yes, thank you, Peter. That's right. We will soon also have GP strategies as part of our portfolio as well. So what's Watershed? Going into a little bit more depth about what exactly Watershed is, we are actually a learning analytics platform that's built on top of our learning record store. So you think about xAPI, you think about the learning and the experiences that are coming into the learning record store. You can sort of think about that like the hard drive of your computer. And then built on top of that, you have the reporting engine, the learning analytics piece that actually uses that data to then build out reports and visualizations based on that xAPI data. And so that learning analytics platform is more like your operating system, right? So like Windows or Mac. And that's really where you'll be spending the majority of your time inside of Watershed, building out your reports, figuring out who completed what, who didn't complete what, who do you have to chase down, that kind of thing. So a little bit about me. Yes, thank you, Megan. I should point out that I will have Peter Gunther, who used to host actually the xAPI cohort. He is actually in the audience and will be able to answer some questions. I totally forgot to mention that, but thank you. Anyway, so so I guess I've been part of the cohort for 3 years. I used to work as an instructional designer in higher education. I worked with faculty to help them design courses and learning experiences and working inside of an LMS. I've also been an educator myself, so I've taught courses both online and face-to-face in information technology and programming. And I was also a former software engineer myself, so I've done some programming work. more recently in Python, but before that, more heavily Java focused. And sort of the last role that I had before I came to Watershed was actually bringing on board an LRS to the organization. So I have done pretty much everything under the sun that you can in terms of L&D. And it's been a really wonderful experience to be able to put myself in the shoes of many of our clients, because I know what it was like to onboard an LRS, to not really know what you're doing, not really know what you don't really know what you don't know necessarily. So it was just a wonderful experience. Anyway, moving on to today's topic, I want to talk about xAPI governance in a very concrete way, because I think that the topic of xAPI governance sounds a little bit scary. It's a little bit broad. It's a little uh, out there. And just to kind of make it a lot more concrete, I'm going to be using this example to sort of help illustrate some of the points that I'm going to make throughout this presentation, right? So if we imagine for a second that you are an instructional designer and you are onboarding 3 different platforms and connecting them to your learning record store, whatever learning record store that is. It doesn't have to be Watershed. It could be, any of the other ones that are out there. You're going to have potentially your LMS, and that could be Cornerstone, for example. Again, just making it super concrete. Maybe you have some storyline courses that you've built that are also sending xAPI statements to your LRS. And then you may have an HRIS such as Workday that it's also sending over your HR data over to your LRS. So you've connected these things to your LRS. Great. And now you're ready to start reporting, right? Everything is hunky-dory, beautiful, wonderful, right? Totally. Except not really. So if you're part of this cohort, you remember that a very basic xAPI statement consists of an actor, a verb, and an object. So Izzy completed the course Fire Safety 101, for example, right? The problem is that when you go to report on these completions from Fire Safety 101, you're going to need to specify um, you'll need to specify the verb that you want, which is going to be completed in this case, and a course, right? So Fire Safety 101. But when you're creating your reports, when you go to specify that verb, all of a sudden you're seeing all these different completed verbs, and you're wondering, well, which one should I pick? Why are there so many? And what do I do? Well, this is happening because different platforms are using different complete verbs. And you're going to need to identify the specific complete verb that you want, depending on how you're configuring your report. Some common scenarios that we've run into, um, you know, many of our clients will say, well, my report says that Bob completed A, but he claims that he completed B. I'm trying to report on this one thing, but the data is missing. I'm trying to report on this, but it shows up twice in the report builder. Which one am I supposed to pick? And even up until the last one, where we talk about that you're trying to combine data from 2 video platforms, but they've structured their xAPI data differently. What do you do? These are all common issues that actually can be resolved with good xAPI governance, because governance is going to impact your activity IDs, the activity types that you're using, the verbs that you're using, as well as the extensions. So if we sort of think about xAPI in sort of something that's a little bit more familiar, For those of you who actually still send things in the mail, I mean, who does that anymore? Most people just fire off an email and don't actually send any physical mail anymore. Um, the post office has sort of a standard format that they use for you to send letters, right? So you're gonna have your name, you're gonna have the street address, and you're gonna have city, state, and zip code. Um, Now, what happens if all of a sudden I have this other company who says, you know what, I want to send this differently. So instead of someone's name, I don't have their name. I have somebody's email address. I have their street address. I have their latitude and longitude, and I have their county. And that latitude and longitude and the county are actually from Chelsea, Michigan, where Torrance Learning is based. So just thought I'd throw that little Easter egg out there. But anyway, uh, if you try to send this obviously through the post office, they're going to be like, "What the heck is this? Can't use it," and it's gonna be undeliverable. But xAPI is actually very flexible, and it's going to allow you to actually, that flexibility is going to mean that you can actually send something like this, including additional data that wasn't a part of the original specification. So that flexibility is wonderful, right? So it allows you to, the xAPI spec allows you to track any type of learning experience, even things that haven't been invented yet. But a con of that flexibility is that, the people that are implementing it, the platforms that are implementing xAPI and sending xAPI statements, they can choose really how they want to structure their data largely. They can pick different verbs, they can pick their own activity IDs, and those differences matter a lot when you're actually trying to start reporting on that data. So if you take a simple example, like who completed a course, there are plenty of verbs that have already been defined. And you can see, for example, the very first one that says, w3id.org completed. The ADL version of the verb also completed. There's also an older version that's basically pre-xAPI, I believe it is, with activity streams, also says complete. Then you have ones that are completed assignments or past. Platforms can choose any one of these or actually come up with their own verbs for completed that they want to send. So, what does that mean for you as a practitioner? What do you do with that information? In the same way, when you're asking a question as simple as who started a course, it's kind of the same thing. When you say started, do you mean launched? Do you mean started? Do you mean previewed, initialized, or this activity stream version of start? What do you mean? And this is where xAPI governance comes to the rescue. xAPI governance can really help you resolve a lot of these issues, or at least mitigate the impact of them. Well, what is it? xAPI governance is a set of processes and controls to ensure the quality of your xAPI data. Good governance is going to make your life a heck of a lot easier when you're trying to report on and use that data. And I should also point out that, the inspiration for this session actually came about from many of our clients, because some of them were asking us for advice on how do I manage all of my xAPI data? How do I manage my statements? What about when we have to design our own statements? What do we do? What's your advice? Other clients came to us because they had actually solved some of those problems, and they were like, here's the tools, here's the methodologies that we use to manage our xAPI data, to govern our xAPI infrastructure. And then we had other other clients who actually made a lot of these mistakes, and we had to work with them to try to parse out, when you've been using the same activity ID across 2 or 3 courses, to try to parse out, well, which thing did they actually complete? So this presentation is the result of, a lot of lessons learned from those clients, and so you're getting the benefit of learning from their mistakes. So these are the 5 steps to quality xAPI governance. You want to have processes and rules. You want to document your xAPI statements. You want to have a solid testing plan in place. Be ready to fix or remove any bad data that still slips through the cracks, and also have a flexible learning analytics platform. And I'll dive into each one of these in more detail. But first, let me just get a sip of water. So that example that I showed earlier around, that you've connected your platforms to your LRS. I'm going to look at just the storyline one, for example, just to kind of start with that, right? Where you're the one who is actually in control of the xAPI statements that are getting sent to your LRS, right? So you are creating them, you've created the activity IDs, you're specifying the verb, the activity, and all that other stuff. In that case, you really want to have processes and rules set up so that you're working towards consistent xAPI data. And even if it's just you, as was the case for me, even if it's just a single person who is the one who's creating these xAPI statements, what you want to do is have certain rules and have processes in place so that every time that you create a new storyline course, and you're creating new xAPI statements, you're creating them in a very consistent way. Because I know that, I don't even know what the heck I've done like yesterday. So if I take, let's say, a month or two between when I'm developing courses, it's very easy for me to forget all of the individual little details and decisions that I made the first time that I created those xAPI statements. And the important thing really is just kind of to establish some sort of rules. Exactly what the rules aren't that important, because you can always add or update or edit them later. What you want to do is just pick something and stick to it. So one example is this, right? So maybe you always want to use lowercase. These are actually two, in this example, you can see 2 different activity IDs. They look very similar, and they only differ by the case of that assessment 1 at the end, but they're actually 2 different activity IDs. And so if you're not paying attention, or if you and someone else in your group of IDs who are sending xAPI statements aren't paying very careful attention, it's very easy to just uh, make a mistake like this, where you think that you're being consistent, but actually you're sending 2 different activity IDs. And that's how those will show up inside of your LRS as 2 separate activities. Another example. So for those of you who are fortunate enough to attend DevLearn about 2 years ago, Travelers did a presentation where they showed off a wonderful web interface. And it was basically just a form fillable, you know, a form that basically the instructional designers would fill out. They put in, things like their department, the course ID, the version, and then when they would hit submit, they would actually get back an activity ID that they would use inside of their storyline courses. Now, there was a lot of complexity behind that. The logic was incredible. But what I'm suggesting here is, if you want to do something like that, where you want your activity IDs to follow a certain pattern, it's very easy to figure that out inside of just a spreadsheet like Google Docs, sorry, Google Sheets, or even in Microsoft Excel, right? So maybe you want your activity IDs to be hierarchical, so they'll include the organization, a department, a course ID, and some sort of a major version, which could either be a number, it could be a date, whatever makes the most sense to you. And so then you can see in the screenshot that's here, an ID could potentially fill out those first four columns, and then you would basically just have a formula in that last column that would aggregate all of those together and create this activity URL that they would then put into their storyline courses. And you can build in a whole bunch of logic into that formula. So you can see, for example, I've made everything lowercase, I've removed all the white space. And so you're actually removing a lot of that complexity for the instructional designers, and you're making sure that they're creating these sort of consistent activity IDs, or at least as consistent as you can make them. Some process examples. If you're using a hierarchical activity ID like I just showed you before, each department within your organization, sales, marketing, tech, may have their own, may be responsible for maintaining their own list of activity IDs that they're using. And really, you can put the onus on them to say, well, you're going to own this, so we don't want you to reuse the same activity ID. And it should be relatively simple in that case, because that way you know that, for example, if all of your activity IDs start with company XYZ/sales or company XYZ/marketing, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for different parts of the organization to try to reuse the same activity ID. Another process example you may want to use is, when you're thinking about new verbs, activity types, or extensions, or if you're not sure about which one you should use, look at the ADL site and look at the tin can registry for existing ones. Chances are there's probably one that's already there, and you don't have to define one yourself. Just take all that complexity out. Just use one that's already out there. All right, so you have processes in place, and rules in place. The next step in sort of quality xAPI governance is really documenting your xAPI statements. You want to keep a record of your xAPI statements across all of the platforms that you're attaching or linking to your LRS. And it's really going to be important for you to be able to refer back to this documentation when you're trying to design reports. And it will also help you to keep track of changes from the various platforms that you're connecting. One thing that's really important that we often get asked is, what happens if my, a vendor that I'm using, let's say Cornerstone, right? That was the example I showed before. Cornerstone may have their own xAPI documentation, and why can't I just rely on that? Well, we have run into the situation where, not specifically with Cornerstone, but with many other vendors who provide their own documentation, that the documentation doesn't always match up with the actual statements themselves. And we have had to go to the vendors and say, your documentation says this, and we are seeing statements that look like that. Why is that? So what we recommend, or what I recommend to you, is don't rely on the vendor documentation. You want to maintain your own so that you can always refer back to it. And I do see a question here around interoperability with other LMSs. Right. So The fact that you're documenting your xAPI statements, every platform, whether it's an LMS or HRIS or something else, is going to be sending statements to your LRS. And they're all going to have their own schema for deciding what verbs they're using, what the format of their activity ID is, etc. So you can't always change what the vendors are doing. You can try, but what I'm trying to get at is, since you can't necessarily change them always, you can at least document these statements that you know are coming from different areas, so that then when you go to report on those completions from Cornerstone, for example, you know what the correct completion verb is, you know what the activity ID should be, um, you know what other components they're including in their xAPI statements, rather than relying on their just their own documentation. The other thing that's also important is this becomes really critical when you want to evaluate a new platform. So there are many platforms or many vendors that say, "Oh, we are xAPI compliant. We send xAPI statements to your LRS." It's perfectly okay for you to pressure those vendors and ask them specifically, "Well, can you give me examples of what types of statements you're sending? I want to see them. Uh, when is it that you're sending those statements? Is it only when a learner completes a course? What about when somebody views a course or views a page inside of the course? Uh, what about SCORM content? Ask them those questions, pressure them, ask them the hard questions that, a lot of them, it's going to be really hard to answer, but if they're good, they will be able to answer those questions for you, and then you'll get a lot more information about exactly what types of activities are being tracked and what that will look like inside of your LRS, and also what data will be available for you to report on. So basically, again, just internal documentation. You want to keep that, compare it to your vendor documentation. Uh, Definitely want to go ahead and do that. Um, One way to potentially document your xAPI statements is using a very simple spreadsheet like this, right? So I know that xAPI statements can be a little bit scary. There's a lot of JSON code that appears there. Um, if we try to just kind of flatten it out a little bit, one thing you could do is take your source fields inside of your platform. Again, let's just say it's Cornerstone. Uh, you you have your user email inside of Cornerstone. Let's say, where does that appear inside of your xAPI statement? That appears inside of the actor.mbox field. And then you may want to also have an example value, just so that you know what type of data will appear there. A verb ID doesn't actually exist inside of the source field, inside of your source platform, but things like a course title, course ID, a score, duration may actually appear. And so you basically just are linking uh, where the platform data is, where that appears inside of your xAPI statement, and an example. So if we go back to our example, I kind of mentioned this already, but you really want to track your xAPI statements across any of the platforms that you're using, whether it's the platform is managed by a vendor, or whether you are the one who's actually managing the xAPI statements that are getting sent. What about extensions? When should I use activity definition, context, or results extensions? These are optional, but the short answer is that you want to use these if you have that data. So we've run into situations where people try to fit data into the let's say, default fields or existing fields in an xAPI statement, right? So people try to put a sales dollar amount into the score property, which is incorrect. If you have a sales dollar amount, you'll want to create an extension for it. Some people try to create extensions for things that already exist in xAPI, like timestamp. So in that case, you don't need an extension. People also try to put a result inside of an activity definition. And what does that look like? Kind of like this, if we go back to that mailing example, right? So you already have a spot where the zip code lives, but some people just try to put that into a different field. And so what that means is that every time that I see 123 Apple Street now, I'm going to have to update the database to say, oh, it's not Izzy Lara anymore. That person that lives there is actually Izzy Lara 11223. And you can imagine that if I ever move to a different zip code, then again, every time I see that address again, I'm going to have to keep updating the name of that activity. So we have created our processes, we've documented our xAPI statements, and now you want to have really a solid testing plan. Um, mistakes are going to happen. The whole point is to try to troubleshoot things and figure things out before they actually get into our production data and screw everything up. um, so just to reiterate here, we had a company that produced several e-learning courses with the same activity ID over a number of months. Unfortunately, it became really difficult to try to parse out. If you're using the same activity ID for activity A, B, and C, it's hard to try to figure out whether, is he actually completed activity A, or was it C, or was it B, if they're all referring to the same activity ID. And so I think in the end, we ended up probably just getting rid of that data entirely, which I'll get to in a moment. But anyway, in terms of testing, I'm really mostly thinking about uh, those scenarios where you're in control of your statements that you're sending, so such as storyline, or when you're trying out a new data source, let's say Salesforce, that you're adding to your LRS. So having a test plan is really critical, no matter which of those two scenarios is involved. Some example tests you could run, you want to make sure that all of your courses are going to be tested in your sandbox before launching to learners. You want to make sure that your slide and course activity IDs are going to be checked for consistency and uniqueness. And then finally, for e-learning courses, you'll check that the data, you'll check your data using the activity report type, which is something specific to Watershed, but I'm sure that other LRSs have something very similar to that. So now you've got your testing plan in place. Even with a solid test plan, there's going to be data that gets through that is just bad. So you just want to know what your options are in terms of your learning analytics platform. Again, this is mainly referring to storyline courses where you're the one who's in control of sending those statements, because generally that's where the mistakes are going to happen. So if you know specifically where those statements are, if you can sort of isolate those bad statements, and you can easily identify the data to fix, then you can easily do a surgical void and replace. So that means because xAPI statements are immutable, it means that you can't actually edit the statements themselves, but what you can do is void them out and then actually reissue new ones that are actually corrected. There is also this other option in some LRSs to edit the database directly based on a pattern. Don't really recommend that too much, especially if you have multiple LRSs, because that means that the data is going to be a little inconsistent between them. But in many cases, sometimes the data is just too far gone, and the data is just too broken, and your only option is really just to kind of just nuke it from orbit. So finally, the last step to a quality governance plan is really just using a flexible learning analytics platform. Uh, Certain ones can help you with inconsistent data, and you want to make sure that the one that you're using is going to be able to help you with that. So I'll show you a couple of slides that are specific to Watershed, but of course, many LRSs have their own features that are probably potentially very similar. So Watershed has the ability to take in some of your HR data, right? I talked about Workday and integrating Workday in. So you may want to build a report that actually shows you the new employees that have joined the organization within the past 30 days. And review this information. Make sure that the company, the division, the group, the region are all correct. And we've actually I just ran into this this week, where the LRS was able to spot that there were two employees that actually had the same email address. And so we reported that back to the organization. They went back to their Workday folks, and they corrected it on their end. So sometimes the LRS is actually the one that's bringing up and spotting some of these issues. You can also alias your activities and verbs. And this is really helpful for, remember, all of those completion verbs that we saw earlier, where maybe you want all of those completion verbs to live under one umbrella of just complete. So that way, when you pick that completion verb, all of the other statements using those other completion verbs also appear. Data search allows you to really search your data and inspect the specific xAPI statements that the LRS is receiving. So part of your testing plan could involve verifying that the statements are showing up here, and it could even be grabbing the statements themselves and putting them into your documentation. Data stats can give you a great overview of your learner population. How many people have statements? How many people don't have statements? And a really good, potentially a good part of your testing plan could involve verifying that the data here matches what you're expecting. So in summary, these are sort of the 5 steps to a quality xAPI governance strategy. I won't reiterate them here, but I've kind of gone over them already in detail. Some additional resources for you. I believe that Megan and team will be sharing out this presentation afterwards, so you'll be able to download our free ebook on 5 steps to get started with learning analytics. And then for those of you who are, we always put in this vendor offer out there for you guys. If you want to test out Watershed, we have an Essentials LRS available to you. Just go to that website, sign up. It'll come with some basic reporting capabilities. And then if you need some additional reporting, you can email us at info@watershedlrs.com. Mention that you're part of the Torrance Learning Cohort, and we'll upgrade your account. And with that, I will send it back over to Jamie, and I guess answer any questions that have come up.
Thank you, Izzy. That was great. And I'm going to jump back to our slides. All right. So we're going to talk about where your teams should be now, and get ready for, I know we have a couple of team updates ready to go. So if you want to get your hands raised, we'll get you ready to give your update on stage. So we are in week 10. This is where you're applying what you've learned. You're deciding on some next steps. Do you want to continue this project going into the next semester? And also you have an opportunity coming up in 2 weeks for team demos. So if you want to let Megan or anyone from the team know that you want to do your project demo on the 18th, we have space available for that. And now we'll get to some team updates. And I see Melissa is here. So Melissa, if you want to come on up, we'll give you the spotlight. And Brian, you're on deck. Oh, maybe. Oh, there she is. Oh, looks like we lost her. So Brian, we're going to go ahead on to you. We'll wait for Melissa to come back.
Oh, let me get the camera. Are you hearing me?
We can hear you, but we can't see. Oh, there you
There
are.
we go. Okay. So I'm leading a group called Team xAPI Profile. This is our week 10 update. The team met last Thursday at 6 p.m. We had Judy, Henry, Peter, and myself on board for the meeting. We started off with updates from DevLearn, and then we went through a revision cycle with a document that we're producing called the xAPI Profile Primer. And part of that primer is echoing some of the great advice that Izzy just gave. And I think I may need to go back through and do a revision cycle just to make sure I'm aligned. But thanks, Izzy, for the good information. The other thing we're looking at for tonight, our next meeting is 6 p.m. tonight. Judy Katz has mentioned that she'd like to build a profile for Pebble Pro. So we're going to take a look at some verbs and see if we can't fill out the human readable documentation that Jason provided us as a template. We were able to publish into the GitHub discussion area, which is now in the GitHub Teams page. Some YouTube video links. One of them was for the CMI5 group, that if Martin's on board, he's going to come in and mention what that group was able to cover. And then also our last meeting. So if you want to catch up with our group, we have a URL out there for our last meeting link. And that's it for Team xAPI Profile. Thank you. Thanks, Jamie.
Great. Thanks, Brian. And Martin, did you want to come on and say anything? Oh, Melissa. So we're still waiting for Melissa to get reconnected. Is there anybody else in the meantime? Oh, we got Melissa back. There she is. Okay.
Can everybody hear me?
Yep, sounds great.
Super. All right. Thanks so much, Jamie. Crossover with kind of what's going on with their team and what's going on with the CMI5 team, which is great. We've talked before about how we've spent a little bit of time again working, having various individuals on the team working to install and test the Catapult CTS. And so we've made a lot of headway getting some of that started. And
Seems like we've lost Melissa again. So we'll wait for her to come back. In the meantime, in the chat, Judy has said if anyone wants in on the discussions and the working group to build the Pebble Pro profile, to just let her know. And we'll give Melissa another minute here. All right. Sorry about that, Melissa. Maybe you can just put your update in the chat or so. All right, great. So we'll just head back here to the last of our cohort business. Some good stuff to know. We have a couple more sessions. again, Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern time, right here in AirMeet. We have a nice quick link for you there if you want to bookmark that. Next week, as mentioned, we do have case studies, xAPI in the wild, and a reminder that our xAPI party is scheduled for December 10th. So there is currently the call for proposals is open until the 11th, and you can also secure your ticket to attend. So you can check out more information there at xapicohort.com/xAPI party. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can contact the cohort team by email or send anybody a message in Slack. And with that, we'll wish you all a great rest of your day, great rest of your week, and we'll see you next week.